Alrighty then, good evening. Hello. I'm Robert Teigen, and this is Robert King over there. And we are going to be discussing the obvious hot topic for the current moment, which is the announcement that the DA wishes to go into coalition with the ANC after 2024. Now, I think it's curious that they're announcing it so far ahead of time. I think realistically, it would probably be better for them to hold their powder dry. But they have been sort of fairly secretive about it up until now. I mean, back in March of last year, Helen Zille went on Biz News, a live presentation, announcing that it would be morally imperative for the DA to form a coalition with the ANC, and that she had made this decision as far back as 2014, which means all of the intervening years where they have claimed that the ANC is an irreparable organized criminal enterprise have been not much more than hot air, even if it's true. I think, I think we're sitting at a very peculiar precipice here, and it's also going to do a lot of harm to the electorate. We've seen recent by-elections show very, very strongly for particularly Afrikaans voters shifting over to the Provincial Plus. I think, that's triggered by a large number of things. I mean, partially the fact that the DA local councillors are very unresponsive to citizens' criticisms, that they've let the quality of governance decline recently. There's also certain problems, particularly in Cape Town, where they have taken a very lackadaisical attitude towards the clearing of land invaders. So you see slums arising pretty much everywhere. And aside from that, we have we have several other policy areas in which the DA have shot themselves in the foot. I think Western Cape Education Department has seen the DA taking rather extreme stances. I mean, for example, Debbie Schaefer's model, which is currently being enforced by David Mania. There was that scandal in Fishhook where they schools under government control were pushing critical race theory on their students, forcing them to go to seminars where they were taught that white people were morally inferior and black people were morally blameless, and that this is a permanent state of affairs until pure, true communism is realized, more or less. And while they sort of scrambled to claim they were doing something about it after it became a bit of a scandal, the reality is that they had teachers at the school who complained about it fired. Additionally, they've been pushing transgenderism into the and various other LGBT things into the curriculum. My theory behind this is that Debbie Schaefer, having lined up a position for herself in the UK civil service, where they make you take a sort of ideological purity test for your commitment to diversity and progress and all that stuff, that she was basically lining her CV by destroying our school system on her way out. And the party here really doesn't seem to have a problem with any of this. And, all in all, look, some of the statistics are really bad. I mean, my home municipality of Drakenstein has a really sort of abysmal track record as far as the DA go. In fact, in terms of maintaining existing infrastructure, the previous ANC run municipality actually has a better track record, if you can believe that, which is why we have the lowest of the 5 ratings for water quality. Largely because they've neglected repair of existing infrastructure for the sake of bankrolling new speculative property expansions, some of which have not really sort of panned out the way that they were supposed to. I'm not sure of the relationships that the property developers have with the local council. but it doesn't seem very good to me. And my first encounter with the municipal manager, Karl Lotz, was that he sort of slyly gave me a nudge and a wink, and when I pointed out the fact that he had a very shiny limited edition sports car, and he said, "You know, there's a very interesting story about how I got that sports car, and maybe I'll tell you someday." And I thought, well, you know, that's written him off as far as I'm concerned, permanently. I think the other thing is that, you know, DA councils, I don't know about everywhere, but in my area, they are notoriously rude, dismissive, condescending, spiteful, and go out of their way to prevent concerned citizens from raising issues. One of our recurrent issues locally is that we have a large homeless problem, but we also have a homeless shelter. Now, the reason the homeless shelter isn't being used, I mean, as one understands in law, if you want to remove someone, you have to find somewhere to place them. And there is a place to put them, only is being squatted by an ANC. I don't know if, I think he's a shadow ward councillor. I'm not sure if he's a ward councillor or shadow ward councillor, but he's an ANC member. And he's been renting this place out to businesses. And the DA Council has been providing them with security paid for by the local taxpayer. So whatever the hell's going on there, I do not know. But there are plenty of other examples locally, I think that many people can name, for why the DA have stopped being what they claim to be. And I think some people are starting to take notice, although the biggest fear up until now has been that any vote for a small party is a vote for the ANC. And the DA continue to run this line, even up till, you know, last 24 hours. Despite the fact that their policy has now shifted to wanting to join the ANC in national government. I think it should be fairly plain for anyone to see that this makes their argument against the small parties rather moot. I mean, a stable coalition with the ANC will involve them having to stop criticizing the ANC members who are guilty of gross corruption, because it would threaten the stability of the community, of the coalition. You know, additionally, the ANC already accused of colluding with white monopoly capital, forming a coalition with the white party, will really be sort of, their feet will be put to the fire, and the EFF will scoop up an enormous share of the votes during that electoral cycle if the DA in fact managed to form this coalition. And I think the other thing is that in order to rectify the public fiscus, and I'm going to just read, I'm just going to read something up because memorizing the numbers can be a bit tricky. But it's, you know, our national fiscus is in real trouble. So, you know, national expenditure before debt servicing costs is currently growing at 2.5% annually and accounts for 32.6% of GDP, with GDP growing 1.6% annually. Expenditure accounts for just over half of GDP growth for the next 5 years, placing the growth of the real economy at a rather dismal 0.8. Because for those of you who don't know, GDP calculations include government expenditure as if it's a real contribution to the economy, which is debatable, especially here in South Africa with the amount of wasteful expenditure that goes down. But this means that South Africa's capacity to survive economically in the long term is decreasing. So if you include the debt, then expenditure grows by 4% per annum. It's currently 2.2 trillion rand a year. GDP is 7.3 trillion, but grows at 1.6% a year. And expenditure will outweigh the total value of the entire private sector in absolute terms by 2035. If nothing changes, and we already know that many very damaging reforms are already planned. And then, you know, everyone can sort of say, okay, well, but, you know, they'll fix the electrical grid by then. But the numbers on that are very clear as well. So according to long-term projections, what we really need now is actually about 80 gigawatts of energy. And instead, we only have 44 gigawatts of energy. And we have 3 major power stations that are deadlined for decommissioning by 2023, 2022, and 2023, 2028, and another one in 2028. That's Camden, Grootvlei, and Komati. They were supposed to be shut down in 2008, 2011, and 2013, respectively, but we've been sort of stringing them along, despite the fact that they're rust buckets, because we bloody need them. And then the president has pledged that they are going to add another 5 gigawatts of energy, which, as a percentage of the shortfall is not really significant. So, load shedding is not going to be fixed. It's going to keep going for the foreseeable future. And those things that they're going to install are going to take a couple of years to go. So, I mean, look, I have heard some sort of optimistic sounding models for electrification in South Africa. There's a guy called, his first name is Clyde Pollitt. I'll publish something on that later. Maybe I'll look it up. But the reason I brought Robert in over here, that side, the reason I brought Robert in is he has a very, very good very good eye for sort of local politics, votes changing. He has a very good memory of who the local candidates are very sort of practical minded in that regard. And so I thought, having a chit chat with him would be quite good. And so, as you can see, this is the headquarters of a by-election in Cape Gullis, where the party is now contesting against the DA, and from what we've seen, it seems relatively easy to turn DA members over to the federal, plus with a little bit of questioning, because confronted with certain key facts, they actually seem to collapse quite quickly. And the reason that I think that the Phrase 1 Plus are worth going for is, number one, they support Cape independence. Number two, they have a chance of forcing the DA into a coalition in the Western Cape that will force them in turn to hold a referendum for Cape independence. So we would like to see that happen. But Rob, how would you characterize the last week or so of canvassing? How do you think it's been going?
Well, I'll just start by saying I think all those problems you summarised at the beginning with the DA, all the things they've been getting up to, I think their problems now, their hens are now coming home to roost, really, and we're starting to see that in the by-election results in the Western Cape, but also in the country at large. And we saw some warning shots last year. The first one really in Bella Bella in Limpopo, where there was a massive swing away from the DA to the Freedom Front. I think it was something like a 30% swing from the DA to the Freedom Front. And then we saw one in the Western Cape where a DA majority of about 80% of the vote they got versus Freedom Front's 13% was reduced to 49% for the DA to 41% for the Freedom Front. And we're probably going to see another thing like that emerge here in Cape Agulhas on Wednesday. I've been, for the last week, we've pretty much been going door to door on a daily basis, speaking to voters here. And it's quite clear that there's a huge number of Freedom Front voters. There's a huge number of undecided voters, DA voters who are now undecided. And their reasons for being undecided are usually they're looking for other options, and they're currently weighing up the political options for them because they want to leave the DA. And then on the doorstep, you find very few people who are still solidly DA. And when you challenge the reasons for voting for the DA still, often it doesn't go much further than the fact that they voted DA in the last few elections, so they're going to continue voting for the DA. And also the slight fear that voting for another party is going to lead to the ANC taking over. But as we see with the DA's talk of a coalition with the ANC, that's starting to crumble. And then also the DA here has just had almost a pretty lackluster campaign. It's been there's been a massive lack of visibility here. We've been going out in vehicles, setting up gazebos throughout the ward, going door to door. And we rarely see the DA canvassing here. So you do need to ask yourself, where's the DA? Why aren't they focusing resources here? The candidate that the DA's presented to the voters here is also a pretty poor quality candidate, brought into the ward a few months before the election day brought in from Krugersdorp, has no connection to the community, in contrast to the very strong candidate the Freedom Front's put forward, which is, ward committee member, founder of the local business association, lived in the community for many years. So that's really what's going on here. I mean, the DA is likely going to face a massive loss in this by-election, and the Freedom Front is set to make some significant gains.
Yes, no, I've noticed that because, I mean, the Vryheidsfront Plus has that policy that all of their candidates have to be local and recognizable in the ward, in the local area in which they're running. It seems to me that, I mean, because when I was looking at the Paarl by-election, I think it's Ward 17, I'm not sure of the number, but...
Ward 17.
The candidate that they fielded was... she was found guilty of corruption charges, and they still put her on the ballot. And she wasn't even like remotely from the area. And they're running
she was based
against
in
like
Wellington.
some guy that like, yeah. So she wasn't from the north of Paarl. She was from like the shadier part of my town.
Yeah, completely different town. But I mean, it was also a few days ago. It was just in another massive display of DA arrogance, and really just that's a contempt of the voter. Really. There was this sort of Facebook interaction with Nicholas, I think his name is Nicholas Myberg, a former DA mayor of Swellendam, who was replaced by a better quality candidate from the party. So he's quite bitter about those kind of things. But there was an interaction on his Facebook page about this whole by-election. The DA is very unhappy that the Freedom Front is talking about their proposal to go into coalition with the ANC. So they were complaining about that on their Facebook page. And then one of the constituents from this ward commented and replied to Nicholas Marburg saying, I haven't seen the DA candidate in my ward. I didn't know about this guy until his wife started trying to sell houses in the area because she's a real estate agent. And then just to show that utter contempt for the voters here, the wife of the DA candidate said, well, in the next few months, you'll get to know us a lot better. I mean, it just goes to show that like there's this born to rule mentality with the DA, and they're going to start learning some tough lessons in these by-elections coming up. I mean, there's other ones coming up as well, like in Barrydale, where it's very close between the DA and ANC, and depending on who stands in that ward, possibly the Freedom Front, that might split the vote and cause the DA to lose that seat. So they're going to have to learn some tough lessons coming up, and they really deserve it because they've just had a very corrupt, contemptible attitude towards the voters in this province.
Yeah, and I mean, people mustn't forget the municipality is actually a stronger sphere of government than the provincial, because unlike the provincial government, the municipalities are in control of their budgets. The provincial government only generates 3% of its own revenue, whereas municipalities, it's like 85 to 90%. And so the amount of control that provinces really have over expenditure and what they can do with it is relatively minimal. They have to ask for permission from the Treasury to do pretty much anything. But at a municipal level, you've got a lot of control. And, look, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of things you can do at a provincial level, which the DA has passed up over the past 15 years they've been in charge, which baffles me because they've had, federalism on their
vast majority of areas. Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many areas like security that they've passed on efforts to take control of. I think there was an article, I forgot who his name was, Free Market Foundation guy. He wrote an article, I think, in the Daily Friend.
Martin van Staden.
Martin van Staden. I think he wrote an article in the Daily Friend talking about how the DA could basically create a de facto security force in the Western Cape that could basically serve as a function of a provincial police force. That could have been done many years ago.
He's very incisive in those areas. Yeah, he's very incisive in those areas. I mean, look, it's a funny thing. I mean, me and him differ a lot about sort of his like libertarian stuff. But when it comes down to brass tacks, he's an extremely practical thinker and very, very creative as well. So, it surprises me because it's not like these options haven't been talked about. But the fact that you have to wait this long for anyone to get anything done, I mean, it's obvious that the DA's initiatives for devolution, while they may align with their manifesto that's been that way for years, the only reason they're making any moves is because, the majority of their voters are now Cape Independence supporters. I mean, I don't know what that poll you were quoting to me was saying. I think it was something like 60%. I mean, it's...
Yeah, around 60% of DA voters support Cape independence. And then it's something like two-thirds support a Cape independence referendum. So, yeah, I mean, and we know across the province, overall, 46% of voters support Cape independence. So, yeah, they've been put under immense pressure from the independence movement to actually present devolution as the sort of the middle ground between centralism and independence. But even then, I mean, we're still, I mean, they've made some progress, but there's still a lot more progress that can be made in the interim, and we'll have to see if that happens. But as the time proceeds, if they're slow to respond to this, then parties like the Freedom Front and maybe the Cape Independence Party as well will just gain. I mean, we've got many by-elections that will probably take place this year, and the Freedom Front has a very strong team and very strong candidates they're putting forward. So the DA is going to make many more losses in the next few months, I imagine.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard to say for sure. I mean, like, I know you put together a little spreadsheet of how they've been doing, and I mean, the numbers aren't very clear, but I mean, I can't imagine the ANC, the DA declaring that they're going to coalition with the ANC will have no effect. I mean, to me, like everyone I've spoken to about this, since the news came out, the immediate response was like, they changed color. Like, you watch people's faces shift from red to white in front of you. It's not a small.
Well, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, it destroys really the DA narrative for election after election after election, which has enabled them to consolidate their majority support in the Western Cape. That voting for a smaller party will lead to a vote for the ANC, because now they're just setting that aside because they're talking about that possibility. I mean, the Freedom Front doesn't talk about the possibility of a coalition with the ANC. We're very clear about that, and as I say on the doorstep, the plan A for the Freedom Front is to try and ensure that we have a multi-party coalition that can take over South Africa. Now, personally, I believe that's quite unlikely. I think the two most likely options, more so than even an ANC-DA coalition, quite frankly, is either an ANC-EFF coalition or an ANC-IFP coalition. I think those are the two most likely options. But so if that happens, then the plan B for the Western Cape is to try and ensure that we get a Cape independence referendum. By doing that, we need to get the DA below 50% into a coalition with the Freedom Front. And people like the idea of a plan B. People want to know that there's a plan B if the ANC and EFF take over, because it is a very realistic possibility. And, from my interactions with people in the DA, I mean, nothing, formal, just informal interactions on, campaign trails or at debates where I've spoken to them. They just don't seem to have any plan B to protect the Western Cape. I mean, I had a short discussion after one of the Worldview debates with Tertius Simmers, and I asked him what happens if the ANC and EFF take over, and he couldn't really provide me a proper answer. So it's very concerning, and I think the voters are starting to pick up on that. And, you have to just look as this debate intensifies in the lead up to 2024, then the losses that the DA are facing now could maximize even further. Because, as I said previously, the DA doesn't actually have, especially among Afrikaans voters in the Western Cape, they're losing, their coloured votes to parties like the Patriotic Alliance and Good, and to an extent the Freedom Front. But among Afrikaans voters, there's really not holding a lot to the DA at the moment. It's simply habit that is the main factor that is driving DA support among Afrikaans voters.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a hard thing, because you're watching everyone sort of retreat into their ethnic coalitions, because now sort of the writing's on the wall, and people are starting to sense, that there's no real shelter, and very few people are really discussing policy anymore. Everyone's, it's very much who do you trust and who are your friends. Very sort of raw, sort of basic identitarian politics are emerging as the main theme. So I know The one thing that I'm worried about, I mean, I don't know what your perspective is on this matter in too much detail. But I mean, my sort of mind is on the wording that Helen Zille kept using. I mean, she's still the only person who's got sort of an active mind in the DA. Everyone else is sort of brain dead, walk-alongs, or talented but otherwise unopinionated sort of technicians and bureaucrats. And so, I mean, she's the only one who's got like a really strong sort of steering voice in the party. And her perspective on the matter is, from interviews she's given on this topic earlier, is she can foresee that a national coalition will be, chaos if it's a coalition of small parties, because it might end up, going the way of Nelson Mandela Bay, where you constantly have to do very unpleasant and morally suspect horse trading with small parties like the Patriotic Alliance. The Patriotic Alliance, to give them a sort of broad character, if they enter into a coalition deal, they ask for very simple things. They just want all of they want the three portfolios with the biggest tender values. And they're not interested in policy. They're not interested in anything. They just give us those portfolios so we can loot. Pretty please. That's the impression that I get from commenters, who have their voice to the door, or their ear to the door, and so.
And I saw also, I mean, they govern in a suspect way, and they also campaign in a suspect way. I mean, passing by a PA event today in Strijsby, you saw them handing out alcohol to the people attending. I mean, clearly that is, what type of party is that really? And is that, I understand the DA position there. Is that really a party you want to work with in government?
Yeah, I mean, like after all of those years of complaining about the DOP system, and then you will vote for a party because they give you DOP. It's, But the thing is that, I mean, as much as we can say that that many small parties are in fact untrustworthy, this is true. At the same time, I mean, I look at the situation with a potential ANC-DA coalition. Ask yourself, well, let's say you're going into that negotiation room and you're Helen Zille, and on the other side of the table, Cyril Ramaphosa. I mean, granted, or let's say a harder negotiator like, Paul Mashatile or someone. And they sit there and they say to you, okay, but why should we come into coalition with you? Because you want all of these things. We're not going to give them to you. And the one and only time that I met Helen Zille in person, she said to me that there are three demands they're going to make. And they're very impressive demands. If the DA had the leverage to achieve them, I'd feel a lot easier about this. But they sort of said, well, okay, we want an end to BEE. We want let me remember what it is. An end to BEE, an end to affirmative action, and it was an independent. They wanted to sell off a lot of state-owned enterprises, and then they wanted to set up an independent corruption investigation commission. Now, I mean, these are actually very practical measures, perfectly understandable. And if I thought they were capable of getting these concessions, I would feel a lot less worried about this. But at this stage, what bargaining ticket they have? They come to the table, and the ANC, unless the ANC drop below 44%, which is unlikely. I mean, as much as that poll from the DA, I don't know how much to trust it, but as much as that poll from the DA may crow about the fact that they're going to drop to 40%, I don't believe it. I simply don't.
Well, look, I mean, I think the more respectable polling that we've seen, I think, puts them in a far more realistic range of about 45 to 50% in that area.
Yeah.
So my guess I'm working on is after 2024, they're going to end up with about 47.5% of the vote.
Yeah. I mean, looking at those numbers, I mean, you think, okay, well, what are your potential coalition partners? There's 1, EFF, 2, DA, and 3, IFP. Because IFP has like 6 or 7. I'd say probably after this election, they'll probably have 7% of the national vote. It'll be good because they're.
I mean, look. I mean, I've got the data here. I mean, I'm not gonna. I can share my screen maybe, but if we look
please,
at
let's do that.
I'm just over here. Okay, got it there. All right. If we look at the majority black wards inside KZN in 2019. The ANC got 59% of the vote, and this is This is from Davy Scholz. It's a subsample of by-election results. That's the sample. So it's not the overall result in these areas. But if we look at the majority black wards inside KZN, in 2019, in the subsample, the ANC got 59% of the vote, the IFP got 20% of the vote, the EFF got 10% of the vote. Fast forward 2 years, in the same sample, the IFP now has 43% of the vote, and the ANC has 41%, and the EFF vote has collapsed to 3%. So we're seeing a really major shift in the results in KZN, and that could have some that's going to have a very consequential impact on the 2024 provincial elections in KZN, and it will also have a big impact on the national elections as well. So I've been wondering whether you might end up in a really bizarre situation where the where the IFP and ANC are in coalition at a national level, where they're working together, and then at the provincial level, the IFP tries to form some sort of multi-party coalition there that they're in charge of. So it will be interesting to see what happens in KZN and what impact that will have on the campaign for Zulu self-determination. Because one reason you can see, because one reason why you would see the IFP going to coalition maybe with the ANC is to protect the Ingonyama Trust from any attempts of nationalisation. So that is one big reason why we might see that.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what I'm seeing as well. But I think it's for me it's sort of like something to hope for. An ANC IFP coalition seems to be by far the most stable, because like if you get an ANC EFF coalition, it's dan is it nag, it's lights out. And I mean, look, in some ways you could sort of celebrate from an accelerationist perspective and say, okay, well, great, then Cape Independence will move forward at light speed. But on the other hand, we've all got family in the interior who are going to have to make very, very quick and hasty plans to protect themselves from whatever the fallout is going to be. And then you've got an ANC DA coalition, which is the second worst option, which means that you're going to see a massive loss of support of both parties within a single election cycle. They will basically have to start forming the core of a party cartel in order to stay in power. But that's unlikely to hold itself together, because, I mean, once that deal is made, the next ANC leadership election is going to suffer a real major I cannot imagine they'll be able to hold themselves together after making a deal like that. I mean, you'd get replaced by some, perhaps not an RET faction exactly, but something resembling it in spirit very, 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 very rapidly. And the DA won't last in power very long. And the main reason for that would be that, I quoted all of these statistics about how doomed our fiscus is. But, let's say you're a ruthless dictator. You could fix that immediately by cutting the budget by 35% overnight. And that is not a small amount. I can't think of a government off the top of my head who's ever done that. And secondly, you've got 50%.
Well, you could probably you could probably reduce the amount you would need to cut if you can simply also get the economic growth up. Because if you can, the situation would be far more sustainable if, for example, the economy is growing at a faster pace than the government expenditures, than and especially with Cape Independence. I mean, the situation for us will be far more easier to manage, because not only will we have less money being sent to the rest of South Africa, we'll be able to keep that here. We'll also be able to crack down on corruption. That would save us a vast amount of money, and would also be able to develop an environment where our economy can actually grow, not at a rate of 1%, but at a rate of a strong, like a developing country should be growing at. So we should be able to put ourselves in a very strong financial situation to contend with that issue if we're able to.
Yeah, I can certainly see this in the Western Cape. But in the country as a whole, you have the problem of this very, very slow burning issue of a dearth of like even reading skills. So there's someone says the audio is bad. Is it bad for you, Robert? Can you hear me?
It was, yeah, I can hear you. I don't know whose
They're
audio it
saying it's
necessarily
echo.
is.
Sure, but oh, I mean, look, if it's sort of echoing as in repeating, um, that's a problem.
I mean, I am in a big room here, so
Oh,
it's
okay. So
closer to the
it's
Wi-Fi.
just no. It's just one person who's saying that. Anyhow, back to the topic at hand. I mean, you've got several problems that are just not immediately soluble. You've got electricity, skills development. You've got illegal settlements. You've got violent crime. Like, I mean, like, in order to really sort this out, in order to really sort this stuff out in short enough time to get everything back on the rails and get GDP up, you would actually have to intervene, cut people off of welfare, end all of the labor regulations, impose law and order in a very sort of quick, sharp fashion. And I don't think there exists anyone in South Africa who has the willpower and the popular support to achieve any of that. So I think I think we're stuck where we are. I mean, I can't imagine a DA-ANC coalition, riding in and deciding, oh, okay, we're just going to tear up the Labor Relations Act, and we're going to, sell off all of our state-owned enterprises, and we're going to, it's like the kind of radical transformation that is necessary to fix this country is something that is not politically achievable. You've got enormous sort of criminal cartels attached to all of these patronage networks in the ANC who are quite happy to murder people by the hundreds in targeted assassinations every electoral cycle. So the idea that one can simply march into Mordor is a little bit suspect for me.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, look, the way I see it being resolved in the end will be like, hopefully we can, get Cape independence before that. But, whether it happens or not, Cape independence, I mean, the country, by the 2030s, even before that, is just going to descend into greater anarchy and, de facto balkanization. You're going to see, at some point, you're just going to see the grants stop because there won't be the money there. And then in that breakdown of order, you're just going to see a new de jure system establish itself.
Yeah, no, you mean de facto, sorry. But yeah, I know what you mean. But I
Well, it's
mean,
going to start as
the
de
thing is,
facto and then it will formalize, I think,
yeah. I mean, like,
over
I think,
time.
but I mean, like, if most modern governments are anything to go by, considering the balance of sort of inertia that you see in most of Africa and the sort of international pressure to maintain, sort of the external forms of liberal democracy, I think, South Africa is going to persist in having the same constitution, regardless of what the facts on the ground are. And I mean, we can already see that, constitution doesn't really do much to protect people from abuses, and it isn't really respected. And the real way that power functions in our society doesn't match what's written on paper. So, I don't think there'll be some kind of new sensible system. I mean, even after collapse, if someone came to power and decided, oh, okay, let me look at what's working and what isn't, let me clear away the dead wood, and then we're going to recognize what is and not recognize what. I don't think there's someone that sensible or forthright in South Africa. Possibly hasn't even been born yet. So
Yeah, no,
again,
really. I mean, it seems like the
it's
end goal is not the end result will just be a form of collapse and anarchy. Because
yeah. But I mean,
when you've got half the population that won't be getting grants anymore, there's going to be a serious catastrophe.
yeah. I mean, I think one of the big things that is worth talking about here is, I mean, we talk a lot about amongst ourselves about things like Cape independence because we're from the Cape. This is our home. But I mean, majority of people are from the interior, and the big question that you're going to have to ask yourself there is, okay, well, what's the next move? I mean, look, at the moment, I think, your best structures to lean on would be your AfriForum, Solidarity guys. Those fellas are at the moment, they're the only ones taking anything seriously. Um,
Well,
you know, I
they're the
look
only
at
ones building a parallel structure to the state, really.
OTA is actually OTA is not bad. I mean, they've shown themselves to be effective against the. They've shown themselves to be effective against the e-tolls. But what I would really like to see more of is serious collaboration amongst sort of business owners. So, I mean, there exist employers' organizations across the country, but a lot of them that are sort of, well-known names to people who are in business are these very sort of big conglomerates for, the mining sector or the steelmaking sector, and they'll sort of take the biggest, fattest companies, and then they'll cut deals with the biggest, fattest unions, and then deals extend to non-parties under Section 32 of the Labour Relations Act. And they use that to sort of squeeze out all the competition and maintain some kind of cartel economy. And I think what's really would be good to see is some kind of civil disobedience from the small and medium-sized enterprises that are organized under names like Nihasa, Labco, so on. Those guys, if they pull finger, they have enormous power to affect politics. Whether it's through refusing the government tax revenue or clogging up the labor bargaining councils, or whatever it is, or even collaborating on building sort of mutually beneficial physical infrastructure. Getting those people organized is actually, I think, of primary importance. Although, I mean, I haven't spoken to Richard Parkmanfuss about this yet, so I guess we'll find out in time. But I do think that's actually for the interior. It's what are your business councils, sort of your employers organizations doing? What are your sort of AfriForums and Solidariteits doing? And look, I mean, I know those guys relatively well, and from what I understand, they do have a lot of Plan B in them, so to speak. And the thing is, I think that they're going to be able to provide a lot of protection to a lot of people when it's crunch time, more so than people suspect. Because at the moment, they have to play pussycat because now is not the time. The state is as fragile as it looks in many respects. It can still do a lot of harm. And you don't want to do anything silly until you need to. And you don't even want to advertise what you've got or what you haven't until you absolutely have to use it. And I think AfriForum are very good in this regard. I think their ability to keep their powder dry and wait for the right moment on many issues is quite good. Sometimes they've been forced to take actions which sometimes seem sort of strange. But I think, for example, a lot of people thought that that lawsuit against Julius Malema was frivolous in the sense that what good came of it. But the thing about that outcome is it actually provided the organization with a very, very powerful decision-making piece of datum, which is that they now know that even the most obvious and heinous sort of attacks on members of their community will be defended by the judicial system. And if you look at the
And
statements
also
they
to an
made in the
extent
immediate
by the
aftermath,
media.
right? But you notice the comments made in the immediate aftermath of that decision the court made. They basically said, okay, well, here's what's happening. Now we are going to be militarily training as many young men as show up. And, it's, a lot of people tell me
Well, I
AfriForum
think in 5 weeks after that case, I think there was saying like 8 farm murders or something that the Freedom Front identified. So there was, obviously it's very hard to, farm murders is a controversial topic, and the motivations behind it is always difficult to identify. But clearly there is possibly some correlation there.
Yeah, it's murky waters. Look, I think it's common sense to look at this and say, okay, yes, they are being targeted. Race is an extremely important part of this, and no one can interpret what Julius Maleme's public communications are other than an endorsement for genocide. And like the idea that his the contextualized content of his public utterances can be interpreted in any other way requires you to be a barefaced liar or clinically insane. And I think, I mean, he's not alone. There are large swathes of the ANC that feel this way. They're not in power at the moment, thankfully. But yeah, it's a matter of time. So, but what I would really like to underline, because I mean, I get a lot of people who say that, AfriForum are not doing anything. When are they going to act or whatever? And it's like, well, why would you act when it's not time to act? It just isn't time to act. You can't press the button now. You have to actually do it when it's necessary or not, or it's like shooting before the enemy is in sight, so to speak. It's not feasible. So I think people should be a little bit more patient. As scary as it all is, white knuckle it. It's get out, get south, or get down. It's these are the options. And fortunately for us, we are south, and we are out of the way of most of the deluge. So it remains to be seen if we can hit the deadline. Because if we can't organise some kind of reasonable political settlement for a referendum and getting the ball rolling for secession in the next couple of years, then it really is we are going to have a plan C. And yeah, we'll see about that.
Look, as it stands, especially with the 2024 elections, I'm relatively optimistic. I don't want to come across as cocky about it, but I'm really relatively optimistic about a very strong performance for the pro-independence parties. And I think especially if there can be some sort of agreement between them before the 2024 elections, then we can really become a force to be reckoned with. I mean, in the long term, or medium term rather, 2029 and onwards, we could actually, if we work together in the 2024 elections and take a significant chunk of the vote there, we can potentially put ourselves in a position where we can replace the DA in future elections. But in the meantime, I mean, it's going to be the most likely outcome is the pro-independence parties take a big chunk of the vote and then force the DA into a coalition at the provincial level. And then that way we get the independence referendum.
Yeah, I mean, look, just to sort of admit the obvious, the pro-independence party has a small slice of the elections. Cape Independence Party, not a very big showing. Cape Coloured Congress, almost exclusively inner city Cape Town. The French from Bliss, mostly white Afrikaans, although increasingly conservative Christian coloureds, and these balances are not going to be majorities.
And also increasing Anglo support as well, I would say. In some areas,
Yeah, no,
like
you do notice a bit more. I mean, even people in my town who've had you have a bit of an anti-Afrikaner thing going on, they're kind of sick of the DA now, because it's just the way that they're treated when they try and bring up complaints. I mean, it's also the ham-fisted way that they deal with problems. I mean, for example, I watched them take out a 300-year-old oak tree in a street nearby my house, and it was because it had bees in it. And the way that they dealt with it, now there are a fair few beekeepers in town who will, for free, come down and remove the bees very kindly for you. But what happened is that the councillor comes down, and he decides the way to deal with this is to have it cut down with sort of short chainsaws by a team of sort of randomly selected local employees who do this without having removed the beehive first, which boggles my mind. I don't even know how they managed to get away with that. But yeah, no, and like what's left, this like really sort of like beautiful old oak tree is just this flat, outline along the ground. It's just extremely sad.
I mean, the number
But
of stories
it
we hear
seems to
from
be.
from. I mean, obviously, the stories we hear from DA local government are not as bad as what we hear in the rest of the country under the ANC administrations, but they're still, in
No,
many
of course
cases, bizarre and other cases corrupt. And that's why it's so important that we get in the Western Cape, not at just at the provincial level, but also at the municipal level, coalitions between the DA and the Freedom Front. So we're in Cape Agulhas at the moment, and that's a municipality where currently the DA is held accountable by their coalition partner in the Freedom Front. And the DA's made a big hoo-ha about this, that the Freedom Front voted with the ANC in council on a particular motion. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the Freedom Front is voted, people vote for the Freedom Front, not for the Freedom Front just to vote blindly with every DA proposal. There are some proposals where the DA are doing something corrupt or stupid, and the Freedom Front has to vote against it. And if the ANC so happens to vote with the Freedom Front, so be it. But
Yeah,
obviously,
because
the
I mean, the
DA
ANC
tries
are
to
going to invite
manipulate the story.
the ANC are going. Yeah, I mean, but like it stands to reason. The ANC will vote against anything the DA does. If the Vryheidsfront Plus disagree with the DA, then the DA just accuses them of collaborating with the other side. It's just such a dishonesty.
Yeah, I mean, it
One thing
just
that's really
puts
sort
this
of impressed me
perspective.
though,
Yeah.
yeah, one thing that's really impressed me though is the caliber of leadership that you sort of see in the Vryheidsfront Plus. I haven't come across anyone who's really differed in this perspective. Is that their leaders are always sort of extremely polite, but at the same time very blunt. It's sort of like being hit with a velvet iron fist within a velvet glove. There's a sort of way of dealing with public with public statements that that I think that Courtenay Mulder and some of these older fellas have, which seems to have disappeared because I mean the DA goes for sort of these slightly hollow theatrical statements, and when you listen to these sort of very down to earth sort of statements from the Vryheidsfront Plus, it sounds remarkably refreshing, I find.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I mean, I've seen this before at some of the debates. I mean, you can just see that Cornet gets a tremendous amount of respect from politicians across the political aisle. That said, I think the DA, recently, for no apparent reason, has started attacking Cornet, as an individual. We've seen it on Facebook, and from certain broadcasts from the DA. But that just goes to show really how far the DA is declining as a party. Standards, morals, values, all of that is going out the window in just a blind quest for power. But as I've said as well, the voters are starting to send them a clear message as well.
That's true. I think a small sort of addendum. Well, we still got before we all click off in a few minutes' time. I did notice that Roman Cabernet has taken up for the ANC side. For the ANC side, I should rephrase that. For the side of the ANC going into coalition with the DA going into coalition with the ANC. And this is the first sort of public commenter that I've seen who's come out and sort of made like, yes, this is a fantastic idea. This is the best of the options available to us. But it strikes me as very bizarre because of, I don't understand how anyone could honestly look at this and go, yeah, this is going to turn out well. It's that bargaining power question.
Just look at our neighbour to the north. The MDC and ZANU-PF went into coalition. Look how that turned out. I mean, the MDC has now turned. I saw a tweet the other day. What happens if the DA in South Africa turns into the MDC, where you're basically, despite doing quite well in elections, you end up just becoming the eternal opposition to the governing party.
Yes. No, I mean it's certainly a possibility. But the way I see it is that the more ANC is not ZANU-PF. It's not as thoroughly militarized. It's not as unified in structure. the other thing is that the DA is also not the MDC. They are run by English liberals, and there's a very strong sort of ethnic dimension there. So there's, the differences are not the same, if that makes any sense. And so what I see happening if they form a coalition is that let's say that the ANC can establish some kind of internal discipline, right? And they can prevent, the pro-DA branch from they can prevent the pro-DA branch from being rooted out by more radical elements. Okay, so they managed to do that. They discipline their party. They stick together, the two of them. Now what you've got is a permanent you've got a permanent coalition, because the DA is too frightened to leave this coalition for any reason. And so gradually, slowly but surely, the longer they have to go on and pretend that the ANC's corruption is tolerable, the more that they'll lose their more principled members. And the more they will have to defend it in public with lies and omissions. And this will corrupt them very, very rapidly. People will lose hope within that party. And the remainder will say, well, screw it, might as well make some money in the meantime. And I don't think that, there are enough people who are completely above doing that for the party to really survive. And you've also got to remember, much of the DA's youth league are to the left of the ANC. So the party will really sort of struggle to keep itself as a liberal party. And they've spent a lot of time appeasing black voters who are never going to vote for them, in order to try, because their idea is that, well, if more black people come to the DA, then our votes they will all be converted to DA voters, and they will all become mascots to the rest of the country to show us that we govern best, and something like that. It's demonstrably not that. And I think that the amount of wealth of core voters of the DA that are having to be liquidated in order to service land invasions. The DA's standard operating procedure today is to say, oh, you've invaded a piece of land. Well, might as well build you some permanent infrastructure and recognize that you own this plot of land anyway, because there's nothing else to do. They don't even really attempt to root them out anymore. And what I find bizarre about their legal approach is they evict them, which exposes them to the PIE Act, which basically makes it impossible to evict anyone, instead of charging them with trespassing. And this is something that I find absolutely bizarre. Why would you not charge them with trespassing? That crime them and their structures. It's so.
Just watching. Well, I mean, look, watching the DA, just basically placating these land invasions, these informal settlements, these illegal settlements, is like watching the party, heaping up its own funeral pyre, because we just see them, inviting more and more people in who are not going to vote for them. Then they're never going to vote for them. You can just look at some of these wards, like in Neisner, I think is one example, where wards have started to shift over from the ANC, from the DA to the ANC, just because you've just got such an influx of people building informal settlements, and in some cases, although the turnout is far lower, they start to vote for the ANC, which starts to displace legacy residents and their voting rights.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just like it's a slow motion ethnic cleansing operation. I mean, for the past 10 and a bit years, the ANC has actually been funding this transfer. They actually go and identify people in the Eastern Cape and say, we'll only give you houses if you go to Cape Town. We'll only give you houses if you go to Nice. Yeah, and I mean, like in Hermanus, I mean, like some of the transformation there have been very interesting. I remember one of my aunts who lives over there. She said back in 2011, she was saying that so many people showed up on within 1 month of that year that they actually had to run on the bank. The local Standard Bank ran out of cash because all of them were promised like a parcel, I think like just over $1,000 each. which went further back then than it does now. But they were promised this parcel of cash, and so many showed up that they literally drained the bank of cash, and they had to shut down and wait for renewed shipments. It was like, this is the kind of thing that's happening, and it's tied to like remarks that famously from Claudia Motsoeneng a few years ago, where he said, there are too many colours in the Western Cape, and they need to go elsewhere. It's like, it's obvious that the ANC is doing this as an ethnic cleansing project. And the DA are going, well, no, that's perfectly fine. We don't mind. As long as we stay in power, that's A-okay. Which is just, it's miserable. It's miserable. I can't think of any way to defend them. Because at this stage, it's like, well, okay, they're more competent in governing because they've got accountants who can make shady deals fit into the local audit. But and they can govern more effectively in the ANC. But what's that for a standard? You govern worse than the worst government in most of the world. What is that? What is that? Like, it's like, okay, I can do limbo if the bar is 2 meters high. Well, no shit, you can.
Well, just to finish off the show with just the peak. We're on the topic of the DA's stupidity, and we really saw that peak this week at the State of the Nation address, and the Pet Zoo film crews just brought it up right here about Steenhuisen basically defending the EFF against the force used against them by the security services when they tried to storm the stage and attack the president, basically.
Oh yeah, and what I would like to say about that series of events is that look, the big debate, the big thing that the ANC says is their moral compass is rule of law, constitution. We are the people, law and order, and so on. But it's interesting how they choose to sort of apply it, and I think there's a fantastic microcosm, because the EFF goes, well, there are these laws, we can't get rid of them, but we also don't care about them, so we're going to use them in a Pharisaical way. If you know the Pharisees are in the New Testament, then that comparison will make sense to you. But the EFF stands up, and the first thing they do is they use the rules of order to create disorder. There's a marvelously ingenious exploitation and a fantastic demonstration of the impotence and the lack of authority that the president had. And the speaker realizing that enough is enough, after making herself look a fool for the first half an hour dithering around trying to get people to shut up, she finally called the security in and started removing them. So they jump on the stage. Most of you have seen this. EFF storm the stage. Security goes, okay, that's enough. You're off. But which is absolutely remarkable. Steenhuisen stands up and says, no, actually, ma'am, ma'am, excuse me, like one of those little, everyone's had one of those kids in class, and I don't think anyone has ever liked one of them. But he said that strictly speaking, according to the rules of the book, you can't really remove anyone unless you formally invited security into the building, and then you have to do. And I just thought, well, it was like a couple of seconds before they would have been in physical contact with the president himself. And his position was going, well, actually, but there's like a law that says we can't do that. And it reminded me of because Richard Wilkinson was who used to be a legal advisor to the city of Cape Town. So I asked him, I said, why is the DA so constantly impotent about this kind of stuff? And he says, well, look, they have a simple culture over there which says we're not going to do anything in case we might actually encounter some legal resistance for doing it. And it's like, it's mind-blowing. It's not even, it's like, it's mind-blowing. And then, of course,
it's just weak leadership.
It's not just weak leadership. It's like a powerful internalized culture. Because look, and
it was an internalized culture of weak leadership. Then
do you credit to Helen Zille? She's been rebuked for things in the past, and it's. But her own party has sort of taken a perspective of trying to hem her in, of saying, well, it doesn't matter if what you're saying is true. It matters whether or not, it's like, kind of the attitude of, if the truth doesn't serve the party line, then so much the worse for the truth. And as much as I think that her long-term plans may be deluded, I think, the fact that she's dealing with that kind of attitude within the party just sort of tells you how lost they are. And she may be the only hand on the steering wheel, but she wants to go in the wrong direction, and the ship wants to go in a different wrong direction, and they're all out to sea. There's not much that can be done.
Well, hopefully they're pulling one way and the other party's pulling the other way. Then hopefully, they'll go in a completely different direction, which is Cape independence. We'll just have to see how that goes.
Yeah, I mean,
it's been a great discussion tonight. I think we definitely need to try and set up one up after we get the results on Wednesday from the by-election in Cape Agulhas, because I think it's going to have quite obviously it's a local by-election, so local issues have played the key role in this result. But there's also been a large discussion, as we've spoken about national and provincial issues, and I think there will be ripple effects on the provincial debate, especially around autonomy. When we get the results, and hopefully if the Freedom Front wins, then the DA is going to be put on notice regarding 2024.
Yeah, the only thing that I'd be really scared of is that the ANC drives such a hard bargain. Let's assume that they decide to go with the DA rather than the IFP. I mean, I can imagine them driving this kind of hard bargain where they say, we want to be part of the Western Cape government. Now, that is something I'd be deeply worried about. If the ANC are allowed back into the Western Cape, and I can't see the DA having enough leverage to deny them that if they ask for it.
Yeah, it's definitely something concerning, but we'll have to see. Look, I think that's maybe a discussion for another time. Then, but it's definitely something that needs to be planned for.
Alrighty then. Well, I just briefly, I want to check if there are any questions. I didn't see any that sort of stuck out that we didn't cover, but I just want to make sure that we've addressed anyone who's asked something pertinent. Because it's not a long chat. I mean, there's only a few of us in here. Someone asked me, do I think the ANC will falter in the next election or business as usual? I think we've answered that. Likely to Cape independence greater or lesser with the DA-ANC coalition? It's actually hard to say. Again, it depends on what the provincial coalition shakes out as. That's really the big question. I mean, do the DA let us in, or do they go in with the Vryheidsfront?
You can imagine also in the one outcome, which is also, I guess, a possibility, if you get a DA, and I don't think we should discuss too much because it's going to take away too much time, but the prospect of a DA-ANC coalition at the national level, and then a DA Freedom Front coalition at the provincial level, what result would that have for Cape independence? It could have some very beneficial results, but that's something to consider for another time.
Well, I mean, I think, as a light note for anyone to sort of end on a little bit of optimism is, I think both of us on the same page is thinking ANC IFP is far more likely. Having a federalist party like the IFP in national coalition is going to work very well for any kind of effort to devolve power to the Western Cape, whether it's more growing autonomy or whether it's secession completely. It's going to help us a lot, and it's going to be better than the ANC, and it's going to be better than the EFF by a long chalk, and it's going to be better than the DA by another fairly decent margin. So I think, let's all pray on the IFP being very persuasive.
And well, look, we've already got a number of examples where this has happened before. I mean, I think Buthelezi was Home Affairs Minister up until 2004. And then for a brief period of time after the 2021 elections, although I think they cancelled the agreement quite quickly, the IFP and ANC did agree to power sharing arrangements in many municipalities in KZN. So I think it's very possible.
Well, on that note, good night everybody, and thank you for coming in. All right, cheerio.